mindset around, and I'd like to genuinely ask you, what do men want?
Nobody deals with any of the really valid issues. And then you get a bunch of anger, and you get a bunch...
She said, oh, I'm going to go do a sweat lodge this evening. And I begged her to take me along, and that was about 6 years ago.
Welcome to Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. This is public access television for Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our guests today are Lillian Biffle and Mark Taylor from the Albuquerque Rape Crisis Center. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. To Speaking of Men, I'm your host, Mike Rivas. We're speaking today with Lillian Biffle and Mark Taylor from the Albuquerque Rape Crisis Center, as I told you before. In the early 1970s, women at the Albuquerque UNM Law School began a center, basically manning the Women's Center and having a hotline for people who were experiencing rape to call in and have a place to turn in dealing with the trauma and the abuse and the violence attached to rape. And it has expanded to the point now where they have 6 full-time employees, they have 4 half-time employees, and they have almost or approximately 100 volunteer advocates who man the lines and try to provide support and counseling for people who have been raped, who have suffered sexual assault. Lillian Biffle has a master's in counseling. She has been dealing with rape crisis for about 3 years. She's a volunteer advocate, and she's the crisis services coordinator and counselor at the Rape Crisis Center. Mark Taylor is a single father of 1 son. He has a boy named Seth who's 18 years old and is a foreign exchange student in Malaysia. Mark has a BS in education. He's a former teacher. He currently works as a writer and illustrator for the Albuquerque Tribune. He was recently accepted into the Masters of Counseling program at the University of New Mexico. Particularly of interest to him is men's issues and how that relates to the development of father-son relationships. So welcome to the program, guys.
Thank you.
Good to see you. This is a topic of tremendous impact, facing and beginning to deal with rape, looking at the violence that women suffer in this society at the hands of men is a real serious problem. I think that one of the things this show tries to address and make an attempt to do is look at the things that are adversely affecting the relationships. And men's attitudes toward women and violence toward women is certainly one of the most serious things that's affecting us today. Lillian, could you maybe start out by just giving us a little bit of information on the types of rape and maybe a definition of sexual assault?
Well, sexual assault, Mike, is a continuum, and often we don't think of certain things as being sexual assault, which are. It can start out being an obscene phone call is considered sexual assault. And I don't know any women, and maybe not any men, who haven't had that kind of sexual assault, or peeping toms. And then it goes all the way to the other end of the continuum, which would be rape or sexual criminal sexual penetration in a much more violent way. But anybody who has had an obscene phone call in the middle of the night knows that's an intrusion. And so we deal with that whole continuum at the center. The kinds of rapists, we don't deal with offenders at the center, but there are different kinds of sort of categories. The kind of assaults we hear about most are perpetrated by offenders who need to have power or dominate over their victims, find someone who's vulnerable and show dominance over them, or assailants who are angry. And this is a way, have a lack of anger control, and this is a way of showing that. Those are the two most common that we see.
Right, so there's the power rapist and the anger rapist, basically. But I think you told me that if you actually did a psychological profile of men, you would not be able to pick out any given characteristics in that. I know some of the people I've dealt with who are looking at sexual addiction in America are saying that they think that sexual behaviors of that kind are an addiction in the same way that substances are, and that there are different levels that people go through in approaching that, which is a boundaries thing. I think you guys we talked about a little bit earlier, where there's just not a clear boundary. It says that 85% of women know the person who sexually assaults them, and 15%, they actually know the person. But can you give me a little bit maybe Mark, could you give me a little definition of that?
Well, when we say that a sexual assault or rape survivor knows the perpetrator, the degree of relationship goes all the way from a husband, former husband, boyfriend type situation, all the way to perhaps somebody who works at the grocery store, and it may not register in her mind that she knows this person, especially out of the context of the grocery store. But generally speaking, in 85% of the cases, it's the people we know that tend to be the larger pool of threat that people need to be worried about. In our society, we like to think that it's the person who jumps out of a bush, breaks into the house, the person who makes an unsuspecting attack on us. And I think one of the reasons we do that in our society is because this is such a scary and messy issue for us to deal with, that if we can blame it on these kind of boogeymen in the bushes, then we don't have to really take responsibility in the people that we know and being careful about what's happening in our relationships.
So we tend to put it all into the shadow instead of saying this is real people doing real damage, and it's people that we see every day in grocery stores or next door or that kind of.
Right. Well, and there's a real trust issue there. You know, with a neighbor or a relative, we've got a lot of trust and relationship with that person, and to suddenly find ourselves victimized by that person is a very, very frightening thing. And there's a lot of denial that's built into that. We will oftentimes deny the early signs that something is going wrong.
You bet. We have a short tape from Parent Craft with some parenting tips in that. We'll be right back.
After an episode of misbehavior, take time to talk with your child. Show as much understanding as you can. Make it clear that the behavior was wrong, but the child is still loved and valued. For instance, you might say something like, "It's not okay for you to draw on walls. Drawing is something you do on paper only, and you do beautiful drawings. Come with me and let's do some drawing on paper now."
Welcome back to Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. That was a parenting tip, regular section of Speaking for Men. It's put together by the Parent Craft people who are, if you're interested in raising children, get some information on it, that's the place to go. Those are the people to see. We're speaking today with Lillian Biffle and Mark Taylor from the Albuquerque Rape Crisis Center. Lillian, in these statistics you wrote down for me, it says 1 in 4 boys and girls can expect to be sexually assaulted before they're 18 years old. 1 in 3 women experience sexual assault in their lifetimes. 1 in 4 college-age women will experience at least sexual assault in their lifetimes. And I wondered if you could, obviously it's a real serious problem with a lot of really tremendous emotional impact on women. Could you tell us a little bit about the Albuquerque Rape Crisis Center and some of the services it offers?
Yes, Mike. We have been in existence about 20 years, and we see both men and women. About 10% of our clients or people who we see in the hospital are men. We do see children, but we are a crisis center, and we see people 8 times in counseling. And so we try to get children to other places where they can be seen for a longer period of time. 8 weeks is just about the time you begin to have a rapport with a child, and then you have to say, sorry, I can't see you anymore, go somewhere else. We have 2 full-time counselors, and we do see people individually for 8 times, and we have groups that run for 8, sometimes 10 or 12 weeks. We have a crisis services department, and that's the department that Mark works in, and those are volunteers who answer our hotline 24 hours a day. Anyone who wants to call in, you don't have to give your name or anything, just if you need to talk with someone about a sexual assault or sexual abuse issue. The volunteers also go to the hospital to meet with victims and their families to help them get through the medical process and the evidence taking, and just to be a support system for them through all of this rigmarole that goes on, the medical part, the police investigation. We offer information and mostly emotional support, because the other professionals who they're speaking with are task-oriented. We need to get the medical stuff out of the way, or we need to do the police report.
This is a free service, I take it?
It is a free service. We do ask our counseling clients for a donation, but it is free. No one is turned away. It's only asked one time, and if you can't, you know, it's never brought up. It's just whatever someone can do. We have a community education department that goes out to schools and any organization who requests a presentation to learn about sexual assault and how prevalent it is in our society, and some of the things that we think perpetuate it, and some of the misinformation that's floating around out there.
Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming, of course, that there's a tremendous amount of isolation for the victim, and a lot of shame, that whole thing of it was somehow the woman's fault. Of course, the statistics say that that's not the way it is at all. Could we, you know, a lot of times we think of post-traumatic stress disorder as something that torture victims or people from war scenarios suffer, and PTSD is actually a real common outcome of sexual assault, isn't it?
Yes, we call it rape trauma syndrome because it has very many similarities to post-traumatic stress disorder, but related to the sexual assault. There is a lot of shame that goes with it, and oftentimes people don't report it for that reason. They come to us for counseling, or they may repress the feelings for 10 or 20 years, but they come up again. Something may trigger those feelings, and that's what's similar to the post-traumatic stress disorder that we hear about mainly with war veterans. The acute part of rape trauma syndrome is what occurs immediately, and that is being extremely fearful, not wanting to go out of your house, not wanting to be alone, not being able to, for a woman, talk to a man. I have male clients who also say that they feel comfortable with women, but because their assailant was a man, they are no longer comfortable with their friends. Needing to move, not feeling safe, not being able to concentrate on work or family or just being in the moment. Having nightmares, not being able to sleep or eat. All of those things are common to post-traumatic stress disorder, and they occur after a sexual assault. The delayed, or the thing that comes later on, is similar to that. Some of the intensity goes away, but a person may have nightmares 20 years later. They may realize, looking back, that they haven't been able to have relationships with men because of that. They've had their trust betrayed, and they can't overcome that. All of us don't realize that we all have post-traumatic stress disorder. If you've ever had a car accident, every time you go by that intersection, you'll think of that. And that's what it is. It isn't as intense, but there's something in you that gets triggered.
So it's real important for anyone who's been sexually assaulted to seek some sort of help for it, rather than they're not the person to blame. And it goes far beyond just a physical assault. You're talking about something that reaches right into the psychology of the person and down into the heart and soul of the being. And that's where a lot of the damage is being done. And that kind of 1 in 4 women, you walk into a room with 20 or 30 people in it, you begin to be aware of that. It begins to make you think that there might be some different ways for the sexes to approach each other. And obviously, for America to begin to heal a little bit, we need to develop those, and we need to talk about them. I'm just, of course, I'm just tremendously being interested in the men's movement as I am. I'm just tremendously overawed at the fact that women over at UNM Law School put this together in the early 70s, and begin to deal with it. I mean, you begin to think about women's recovery and women trying to change lifestyles and do some things for society as an active member. That's really something to be commended. So, one of the things we were kind of wanted to talk about a little bit was the fact that our boundaries get kind of muddled a lot of times in social situations, and the fact that women are, the one Bradshaw uses is the old rule of thumb thing where in Puritan days you could not beat your wife with a stick bigger than the size of your thumb. And that is that's the concept of women and children as property, and the objectification of women, so that they're not. You guys brought us some magazine covers we put up back here as a backdrop, where we're looking at the fact that the media uses women to gain the attention of men and of the commercial consumer, I guess. And well, let's talk about that when we come back. We have just a short public service announcement. We'll be right back with you. Please stay around and we'll talk some more.
The next time you're sitting around with some friends, try this. Raise your glass and say, "To freedom."
Try it. You may feel slightly self-conscious, but after all, no harm can come, can it?
2 students in Portugal were sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for doing just that. Toasting to freedom.
That incident on May 28, 1961, sparked the creation of Amnesty International.
Since then, we have intervened on behalf of tens of thousands of prisoners of conscience.
But today, in over 50 countries, you can still be put in prison just for saying what you believe.
In over 60 countries, torture is still systematically used. And in over 100 countries, you can still be put to death, even for political offenses not involving violence. How effective are we? A former official from El Salvador testified,
"If there's an appeal from some foreign government or Amnesty International, then they will live. Otherwise, they are dead."
Join us.
Welcome back to Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. Our guests today are Lillian Biffle and Mark Taylor from the Albuquerque Rape Crisis Center. We're talking about rape. And one of the things we were discussing before our break was the fact that the media, a great deal of the time, objectifies women, and the society objectifies women. And in doing that, there's a dehumanization that takes place. And I thought you guys might want to say a little bit about that, maybe. Would either one of you like to comment?
Well, Mike, in my work in graduate school at the university, I recently did a project looking at that very issue, how the media, in this case I was looking at magazine advertising and editorial illustrations, exploits women and reinforces a lot of really destructive messages and myths in our society. And there's a few of the samples on the board behind us here. And if you look, it's amazing how consistent it is. Women are shown usually in very passive positions or roles. Men are shown as being very active and dynamic and taking charge of the world. And these messages, while any one of them individually may not influence anyone's attitudes or behaviors that much, taken together with the literally thousands of messages we get during a week, from magazines, television, radio, our popular music, television shows, taken together, that creates a very, I feel, violent and exploitive environment towards women. And men lose out on it also. Men are expected to fit these kind of macho Charles Bronson, Clint Eastwood type roles and expectations, which deny a lot of parts within them.
Yeah, that you know, that whole thing of being macho and you're a sissy if you show feelings and that kind of stuff. I think one of the really thrilling things about the men's movement is that for a long time men have been trying to get in touch with the feminine, but now a lot of men are trying to get in touch with what we call a deeper masculine. And to get in touch with that, you have to begin to feel, and you have to begin to deal with your grief, and you have to become aware of what is happening out here. There is so much, we were talking during the break, you know, there is so much no talk going on in our society, and there is so much no feel going on that, you know, in the age of communication, I say this almost every program, in the age of communication, men and women just aren't communicating too well. So, you know, I think it's real important to realize that women aren't just out there in negligees. You know, I was looking at the Madonna cover there on the Vanity Fair, and it suddenly dawns on me that she just exploits that whole thing to the max. I guess that's the one statement she makes. She takes that woman as object, sex symbol thing, and just exploits the hell out of it, you know, right down the line. And which is really kind of a spoof on and a manipulation of the media itself when you think about it. You know?
Right.
You know, women are little girls. They're teens. They're you know, now then they're as much a part of the working society as men are, and inevitably for men they end up for us. Our wives and the mother of our children, and they were our mothers growing. And how it can get to the point where we lose a communication value and lose human value to the point where we are violently exploiting and hurting one another. It's just, we got to do some things about that. You know, we're down into about our last 5 minutes of the program. Would you like to you guys are looking for volunteers and other things at the center. Could people participate, come down and spend some time with you if they wanted to do that?
Yes, we're always looking for volunteers. You can call the center, which is 266-7711, and just tell whoever answers that you would like to be a volunteer, and they'll explain to you what needs to be done and what you'd be doing if you were a volunteer. And we really need people, and we'd like men and women. There is a great need for men, which Mark can talk about a little bit, because that's what he does.
Yeah, I would, for men in the audience who are concerned about this issue, and I think ultimately if we're going to reduce the level of violence against women in this society, it's going to come from men becoming involved. And the Rape Crisis Center provides a really wonderful example to not only make a difference individually with working with survivors of sexual assault, but I think it makes a real strong statement to the community also. And I would be particularly interested in hearing from men who would be interested in working with us at the Rape Crisis Center. There's opportunities to do public speaking, and I think that getting men out in the community to talk about these issues would be very good. It would provide some good role models, particularly working with teens and young men. So I would urge men to do that. From your own personal point of view, there's a lot to be gained. The training at Rape Crisis, the support that's given, the level of communication is really wonderful. It's a good experience.
You bet. You know, I think that one of the things that was interesting in speaking with both of you before the program was that for men who have the potential to rape and for men who have sexual problems, there's not any place existent right now that you can go outside of just getting a private counselor. And I think it's real important that men begin to work with other men and get a little bit of that no-talk rule out of the way. I know one of the real goals of the men's movement is mentorship, and that is older men working and helping younger men as they try to work through this nightmare of adolescence anymore. I mean, that's just a rough time for people, young males especially. And I think as men's groups form and as we get together in social groups and societies and we go out and do our drumming and things, I think it's real important that men begin to talk to each other about this thing of violence against women and what triggers it. We had just touched on the fact that it might be a result of men feeling disempowered. You know, if there's such a thing as a power rapist, so how do you get empowerment as a man in this world? And how do you learn to not take it out on women and to deal with this world like it is and see women as partners, you know?
I think the important thing, Mike, is that men need to take responsibility for themselves. The movie that's out right now, Boys in the Hood, gives a wonderful portrayal of the responsibility that we men have towards our sons and towards other young men in our community. And there has been an absence of good positive role models. Men generally in our society for the last 100 years or so have abdicated the responsibility of providing leadership and role models to young men. And that's where the men in the audience who are watching this show have not only an opportunity, but I would even say a responsibility. I think we have a responsibility, a social responsibility, a personal responsibility. And
to ourselves,
to our children, to our nephews, to our neighbors. This is the thing that's kind of evaporated in our society. In terms of getting clear on our own issues, I think that if somebody is dealing with feelings of anger, perhaps they were victimized as children themselves, I think it's important that they get help. And there are a number of different agencies where they can go to get free counseling and help.
Listen, I'll tell you what, I'd like to thank you guys for coming down here. I don't know how much any of this does, but I think it's important that we try. You know, I think a lot of this is, a friend of mine's a salesman for one of the radio stations. He says you just suit up, you know, so that's what we're trying to do. And I'd like to thank both of you for coming down. We will have the Rape Crisis hotline number. Please join us for part 2 of this program, which we'll be talking about male mentoring and movies like Boys in the Hood. See you soon. Bye-bye.